the other hand, one meets with equally illusory assumptions about the alleged presence of qualities which merely serve to cover up the true facts of the case. In this broad belt of unconsciousness, which is immune to conscious criticism and control, we stand defenseless, open to all kinds of influences and psychic infections. As with all dangers, we can guard against the risk of psychic infection only when we know what is attacking us, and how, where, and when the attack will come. Since self-knowledge is a matter of getting to know the individual facts, theories help very little in this respect. Furthermore, a theory lays claim to universal validity, the less capable it is of doing justice to the individual facts. Any theory based on experience is necessarily statistical. That is to say, it formulates an ideal average which abolishes all exceptions at either end of the scale and replaces them by an abstract mean. This mean is quite valid, though it need not necessarily occur in reality. Despite this, it figures in the theory as an unassailable fundamental fact. The exemptions at either extreme, though equally factual, do not appear in the final result at all, since they cancel each other out. If, for instance, I determine the weight of each stone in a bed of pebbles and get an average of 145 grams, this tells me very little about the real nature of the pebbles. Anyone who thought, on the basis of these findings, that he could pick up a pebble of 145 grams at the first try would be in for a serious disappointment. Indeed, it might well happen that however long he searched, he would not find a single pebble weighing exactly 145 grams. The statistical method shows the facts in the light of the ideal average, but does not give us a picture of their empirical reality. While reflecting an indisputable aspect of reality, it can falsify the actual truth in a most misleading way. This is particularly true of theories which are based on statistics. The distinctive thing about real facts, however, is their individuality. Not to put too fine a point on it, one could say that the real picture consists of nothing but exceptions to the rule, and that, in consequence, absolute reality has predominantly the character of irregularity. These considerations must be borne in the mind whenever there is talk of a theory serving as a guide to self-knowledge. There is and can be no self-knowledge based on the theoretical assumptions for the object of self-knowledge. Or for the object of self-knowledge is an individual, a relative exception and an irregular phenomenon. Hence, it is not the universal and the regular that characterize the individual, but rather the unique. He is not to be understood as a recurrent unit, but as something unique and singular, which in the last analysis can neither be known nor compared with anything else. At the same time, man, as a member of species, can and must be described as a statistical unit. Otherwise, nothing general could be said about him. For this purpose, he has to be regarded as a comparative unit. This results in a universally valid anthropology or psychology, as the case may be, with an abstract picture of man as an average unit from which all the individual features have been removed. But it is precisely these features which are of paramount importance for understanding man. If I want to understand an individual human being, I must lay aside all scientific knowledge of the average man and discard all theories in order to adopt a completely new and unprejudiced attitude. I can only approach the task of understanding with a free and open mind, whereas knowledge of man, or insight into human character, presupposes all sorts of knowledge about mankind in general. Now, whether it is a question of knowledge or I need a water break, 1 second. Now, whether it is a question of understanding a fellow human being or of self-knowledge, I must in both cases leave all theoretical assumptions behind me. Since scientific knowledge not only enjoys universal esteem, but in the eyes of the modern man, counts as the only intellectual and spiritual authority, understanding the individual obliges me to commit lèse-majesté, so to speak, to turn a blind eye to scientific knowledge. This is a sacrifice not lightly made, for the scientific attitude cannot rid itself so easily of its sense of responsibility. And if the psychologist happens to be a doctor who wants not only to classify his patient scientifically, but also to understand him as a human being, he is threatened with the conflict of duties between the two diametrically opposed and mutually exclusive attitudes of knowledge on the one hand, and understanding on the other. This conflict cannot be solved by an either-or, but only by a kind of two-way thinking. Doing one thing while not losing sight of the other. In view of the fact that in principle, the positive advantages of knowledge work specifically to the disadvantage of understanding, the judgment resulting therefrom is likely to be something of a paradox. Judged scientifically, the individual is nothing but a unit which repeats itself ad infinitum, and could be just as well be designated with the letter of the alphabet. For understanding, on the other hand, it is just the unique individual human being who, when stripped of all of those conformities and regularities, so dear to the heart of the scientist, is the supreme and only real object of investigation. The doctor, above all, should be aware of this contradiction. On the one hand, he is equipped with the statistical truths of his scientific training, and on the other, he is faced with the task of treating a sick person who, especially in the case of psychic suffering, requires individual understanding. The more schematic the treatment is, the more resistances it quite rightly calls upon the patient, and the more the cure is jeopardized. My eyes are getting unfocused. Sorry. There's like 4 things between me and the book right now, the camera and light, microphone. I can't, I have to look at it weird. Okay. The psychotherapist sees himself compelled willy-nilly to regard the individuality of a patient as an essential fact in the picture and to arrange his methods of treatment accordingly. Today, over the whole field of medicine, it is recognized that the task of the doctor consists in treating the sick person, not an abstract illness. This illustration in the case of medicine is only a special instance of the problem of education and training in general. Scientific education is based in the main on statistical truths and abstract knowledge, and therefore imparts an unrealistic, rational picture of the world, in which the individual, as a merely marginal phenomenon, plays no role. The individual, however, is an irrational datum. It is the true and authentic carrier of reality, the concrete man, as opposed to the unreal ideal or normal man to whom the scientific statements refer. What is more, most of the natural sciences try to represent the results of their investigations as though these had come into existence without man's intervention, in such a way that the collaboration of the psyche, an indispensable factor, remains invisible. An exception to this is modern physics, which recognizes that the observed is not independent of the observer. So in this respect, too, science conveys a picture of the world from which a real human psyche appears to be excluded, the very antitheses of the humanities. Under the influence of scientific assumptions, not only the psyche, but the individual man, and indeed all individual events whatsoever, suffer a leveling down and a process of blurring that distorts the picture of reality into a conceptual average. We ought not to underestimate the psychological effect of the statistical world picture. It displaces the individual in favor of anonymous units that pile up into mass formations. Science supplies us with, instead of the concrete individual, the names of organizations, and at the highest point,